Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Nick, and I help direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into tonight's event with Bradford Morrow and Elizabeth Hand, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass-Wyden. We want to thank you all for all of your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, we are excited to have with us Bradford Morrow to celebrate the launch of his new book, The Forger's Daughter. Brad is the author of 9 novels and a short story collection. He is the founding editor of Conjunctions and has contributed to many anthologies and journals. A Bard Center Fellow and Professor of Literature at Bard College, he lives in New York City. Joining Bradford in conversation is Elizabeth Hand, author of more than 14 cross-genre novels and collections of short fiction. Her work has received the Shirley Jackson Award 3 times, the World Fantasy Award 4 times, the Nebula Award twice, as well as the James M. Tiptree Jr. and Mythopoeic Society Awards. She's a longtime critic and contributor of essays for the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Salon, Boston Review, and the Village Voice, among many others. She divides her time between the Maine coast and North London. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Bradford Morrow and Elizabeth Hand to the stage.
Thank you, Nick. And wonderful to see you, Brad. I'm dividing my time between the various rooms of my house in Maine at the moment. And I'm only sorry we are not actually doing this in the rare book room at the Strand, but your library, of which I can see a part, Brad, it's a pretty good stand-in for that.
Well, you've got books behind you too, Liz.
Yeah, well, it's an occupational hazard.
Right.
So, as Nick just said, we are here to celebrate the publication of Brad's wonderful new novel, The Forger's Daughter, which is a gorgeous artifact, as well as being an absolutely marvelous piece of storytelling. This is a sequel to your wonderful 2014 novel, The Forgers. And I must say that as much as it reads like a love letter to books and to book collectors and to Edgar Allan Poe, all of these wonderful things that we are just sort of, thrown together in this wonderful gallimalfry. The Forger's Daughter is also a rather marvelous love letter to the art of forgery, because in your hands anyway, it is an art, if a sinister one, and obviously it interested you enough that you have written a second novel dealing with it. So I wanted to start off by asking, how did you come to this fascination with and this remarkable knowledge of forgers and forgery?
I'm not a forger myself. Let's clear that bit aside. Forgery to me is kind of a fascinating topic, even more than faking a painting or forging a manuscript. Forgery is, to me, the word itself is fascinating. It's in the 14th century, it had only a benign meaning. You forged things meant you assembled, created things. Even today, you can forge a head, you can forge a friendship. But forgery has that diabolical side as well, where you're fooling people. You're trying to veil something that's, as you say, sinister. So it has that kind of lovely dual quality, the word itself. And so I became interested in book forgery because I'm interested in books. And just over a period of time, I have encountered at book fairs forged signatures, forged inscriptions. I remember on eBay once I alerted somebody who was very unhappy with me that the William Burroughs signatures he had on his books on eBay weren't by William Burroughs at all, because Burroughs doesn't dot his I's in his signatures. If a William Burroughs signature with dotted I's, the chances are good it's a fake. Virginia Woolf never visited the United States, so I saw at a book fair maybe a decade ago at the Armory Show, which is the biggest show in the world of antiquarian books, and it's a very prestigious place. Prominently displayed a Virginia Woolf inscription to somebody in the wrong colored ink. She usually used purple ink, and signed in New York City. And Woolf never had gone to New York City. Also, she rarely inscribed outside her Bloomsbury circle of friends. So I commented to it was like a $15,000 book, and I commented to a friend of mine as a forger. So, you know, the whole world is kind of, you know, there's a forging aspect to how we can behave with each other. We kind of recreate ourselves. We put our best face forward, as it were, and sometimes that best face isn't really who we are. So I love the complexity of the idea, just beyond pen, paper, and forging, you know, a manuscript by Edgar Allan Poe or a book by Edgar Allan Poe. Although forgers have to have such a surfeit of knowledge. They have to be historians. They have to have a sensitivity. They have to know that Virginia Woolf didn't come to New York at any moment in her life before you go forging her signature. There's just so much you need to know to make a good forgery. It's like an old phrase, it takes a lot of truth to tell a lie, a good lie. Well, that's the same thing with forgery. Paper, you have to know chemistry, you have to know so much stuff. So yeah, I got interested in it, and I enjoyed writing both these books.
Yeah, well, it's remarkable to hear you talk about that, because it just the width and depth and breadth of knowledge that you have of the field, of everything having to do with literature and book collecting, that you've gleaned over so many years. I will now take what I've learned, and I will always I will go through my bookshelves and carefully check every signed copy of something by William Burroughs and check to see if the I has been dotted.
Well, with William, you never know. One day he might have actually dotted some I's. But
in a weak moment.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you're talking about all the various meanings of the word forge. And I was thinking when I was reading the book about how writing fiction can itself be almost seen as an act of forgery. I think there's even a line in the book, something to that effect, about rewriting one's own history. And so, you know, like forgery, writing is an act of invention, of cloaking oneself in somebody else's identity, especially if you have a first-person narrator, which
Right.
you do in this novel. So you're completely immersing yourself in somebody else's character and voice.
Well,
And
two first-person narrators.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say two first-person narrators that alternate chapters. And you've written many books, and you know, in shorter fiction. But I want to know, what was it like? I mean, there are, as you just said, there are two narrators here, one male, one female, husband and wife. Will, the husband, I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying he is sort of, while he's a sympathetic character, this is a mystery novel, you know, it's a crime novel. And Will also has a rather wiggly moral compass. So I wanted to know what it was like for you to inhabit that voice, that head. Did it come easily to you?
Maybe too easily. You know, maybe I shouldn't admit to how much I really like Will. I can't help myself. Even though he's a profoundly shady character. Even shady is too nice of a word for, you know, what's deep, very deep in his past, and that he continues to cover up. but you know, you grow fond of even your worst characters. You must know that, Liz. I mean, you've written some pretty shady characters yourself, and some strange ones, and some ones that are troubled. Um, and I think as a writer, you maybe it's just like being a parent. In fact, you love them equally. You see they're troubled, and you want to investigate, examine where that trouble is coming from. But I really like doing a dual narrative. I was told by an editor of mine at Viking, who I hope is not in the audience tonight, but she told me that doing dual narratives is kind of an easy way out. And I found it to be a little, really the hard way out. But I thought about writing this book in Will's voice as I had the Forgers. And anybody who's read the Forgers will know that Will is a very unreliable narrator, classically unreliable narrator. And I thought, well, let's don't go that way this time. Let's have his wife, who knows him better than anybody, except for a couple of small details, and let's see what it would be like to have them play off each other, because they know things that the other person doesn't know, and they're each a little bit like most couples, like many people in life. There's a little bit of forgery going on, a little bit of shading, the truth. I love that "You Too" line from a song some years ago, but there's a line, "even better than the real thing." I've always loved that line, because what's better than the real thing? That doesn't really, if you look at it, that doesn't make much sense. But we try to create things that are better than the real thing, and so that's the same thing with forgery. In fact, some forgers get caught out because it's the forgeries are too perfect. Some forgers are actually collected, Liz. And I know that you're.
No, no idea.
Yeah, I know Thomas Chatterton, and there's a guy, 20th century forger named Cozy, who forged all just famous American politicians and statesmen, and everything from George Washington to Lincoln to Edgar Allan Poe. He forged Poe, and he's kind of a pain in the neck of collectors because he's so good. Sometimes you can tell he's forged something because it's too good, it's too clean. If you sign, I don't sign my name the same way every time. You, Liz? It's always a little bit different.
No, I don't. And although I do have to say, when I was in fourth grade, I don't know why, it must have been a very boring history class. I focused obsessively for about a week on forging the signature of the political cartoonist Thomas Nast, who is best known as creating, the sort of famous image of Santa Claus. And I can still do that pretty well.
Right.
But my own signature is sort of an indecipherable scrawl.
Right. But if you have a clutch of letters from Edgar Allan Poe, and he has the same squiggle every time exactly under his name, you might want to be careful, because Poe in his lifetime went through all kinds of different signatures, and the underscoring is sometimes different, and sometimes he'll make the letter A between Edgar and Poe smaller than the Edgar Poe, because that's the Alan he took that name from his foster father, with whom he had a very challenging, difficult relationship, on and off, mostly off. And so sometimes he would make the A a little bit smaller than his. So there's you can read a lot into a signature and into handwriting. So there's a bit of graphology going on too.
Yeah. Well, it was one of the things I found really fascinating was learning, which I did not know. I mean, I've read Poe, obviously. I don't think I've read Tamerlane. And this book revolves around, again, I don't think this is a spoiler alert, Tamerlane, which is Poe's rarest work, or the particular copy in this book is, correct? In your novel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's his first book. It was published when he was 18. It's a little unclear who paid for the publication, because Poe didn't have any money, and this printer had never printed a book before. He had printed apothecary labels and just ephemera, like probably funeral cards or wedding, who knows. But how the book was printed in an unknown number of copies. I'm sure it was more than 12. But you know, they're just it's the rarest book in American literature. Actually, it's not just Poe's rarest book. It is the rarest book in American letters. The copies are even of the 12 copies, one was stolen some years ago from the Alderman Library at the University of Virginia, and its whereabouts are unknown. It may never resurface. And then another copy is in the hands of Anonymous, and every single, Anonymous, and every single person, Poe experts, the greatest Poe collector in the world is Susan Tane. They don't really know who this Anonymous is, so I don't know about that copy. So really, there are 10 copies that you could actually, that are in institutions. One's in the British Library, the rest are in the United States. And 3 are here in New York. One is in Susan Tane's collection, and the other 2 are at the Berg Library. But yeah, it is one rare book. It's interesting. I was talking with Chris Sempner, who is at the Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia. He's the director of the Poe Museum. And he was writing me saying that maybe this book might cause another copy to come to surface, because they surface like once a generation, it seems like. Every generation has its own Tamerlane.
That would be amazing.
Oh, nothing would make me happier.
Flush it out. That would be incredible. Well, one of the things I loved about this book is, his love for his work and books is so palpable, and he talks several times about how as a child his father took him to a museum, I think in Boston, but that may not be
Philadelphia.
in Philadelphia, and he saw a copy of one of the copies of Tamerlane in a vitrine, and he describes it. It made me think of Virginia Woolf's famous moments of being, her experience as a child seeing the marigolds. And I thought, wow, this is this guy's moment of being. But for you researching this book, and I know you did an extensive amount of research and consulted all of these people and visited them and visited various places, and you got to see one of these copies, and I can't recall if you examined it or what, but what was that experience like for you to come, to look at, to see this the real artifact that you had been describing in your book?
Well, I've handled 3 of them actually, which is kind of amazing. It felt, the first one I held was at Susan's copy, which is actually the one that's maybe the best known, because the cover, which is reproduced on the cover of this book, although it's a slightly different color. The actual, yeah, see that stain on there? That's sometime in the 19th century or maybe early 20th century, somebody used it as a coaster, the original Tamerlane. So it has this water stain or scotch. I like to think of it as a whiskey stain or scotch stain or something. So holding it in my hands for the first time, I just thought, wow, she's allowing me to hold this, because it's very light, it's very delicate, it's very fragile. It's truly a piece of ephemera. It's something your eye would pass right over without in a bookshop. It'd be so easy to just like say, what's that thing, or put your glass of scotch down on it. The other 2 I saw were at the Berg collection in the New York Public Library, and one didn't have its cover and one does have its cover. There may be some that were issued without a cover or just got out without a cover, or the cover was lost a long time ago. And the librarian there Carolyn Vega was kind enough to take a couple of photographs of me, which I'm embarrassed by, because I'm just so awestruck. I mean, my mouth is wide open. I'm like drooling on these $1 million, on these amazing artifacts. But yeah, they don't get shown all that often either. I think, You know, I'd had to do a lot of work to find out where Will would have actually seen a copy. That took a lot of research. So, I mean, because everything in the book is as real as I can make it. That's one of the great parts about writing fiction where there's fact involved. The more you load in actual and factual facts, the better your fiction is going to float, I think. So a librarian at Free Library of Philadelphia, she helped me work out when he might have seen it down there, you know, years ago. But yeah, no, holding it was touching it, thumbing through it. It's not a great work of literature. So Liz, no need for you to read it. It's
yeah, but I want to now.
well, yeah, well, it's just very Byronic. A lot of poetry published in the early 19th century was very, Byron was just all the rage. He was the Beatles he was all the rage. So he you know, he wrote the poem. There's a few poems at the end that I actually liked some of the shorter ones better. But there are moments in Tamerlane, the poem, that you can see Poe. You can see this spark of brilliance just kind of flashing off the page. Just a couple of stanzas here, some images there. You know, he was just a kid, as I say. So it's funny, he didn't put his name on the book. In part, I think no one knows exactly why. He forged his identity a lot. He joined the army at that point up in Boston, and he went in. He joined under the name Edgar A. Perry, I believe. So even at that time, and he put by a Bostonian because I think he didn't want anybody to know he was up in Boston. He didn't want his father, his foster father to know. So he was a sly customer himself. But get back to your question, yeah, it was an honor. What a privilege to hold something like that. It's the only book that young printer, Calvin, was it Calvin Thomas? He ever published.
Wow. Well, you've given him a very good platform to show it off in your novel. You were just talking about, holding the book and, and you describe it as being just this bit of ephemera, this slight thing that's so small that it actually, it can be tucked into another book and not seen or found initially.
It's roughly 6 by 4 inches, somewhere.
Yeah, so little.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I was thinking when I was reading your novel, and I was speculating that this is some weird thing having to do with the pandemic, because I just was so acutely aware of all of the tactile qualities of your descriptions. I mean, you just described so many things that I felt by the time I finished it that I could forge something myself. You describe the paper that's used, the old paper, and I could smell the ink, and people holding it over, I think, a candle flame to sort of age it. They didn't spill coffee on it, but all of these processes, and it was just so vivid. And what was also incredibly vivid, which really struck me because I was rereading the book to prepare for this. So I was rereading it in the last week or so. And are your descriptions of autumn in upstate New York, which is very similar to, late summer, early autumn, like August, early September, very similar to the weather up here in Maine. And this is almost kind of a craft question from one writer to another. Mm-hmm. And I was curious, when did you write the novel? Like, what season? Did you write it in the depths of winter, fondly remembering the late summer and autumn? When did you write it? And what's it like as a writer to channel that energy from one season to the next?
That's a really interesting question. I started it in the summer a couple of years ago, and I kept track. So it's set. When I was first writing the book, I kept track of the weather. I wrote it mostly in a place over near the Delaware, but I know Dutchess County quite well because I teach at Bard College. and I just know that area really well. And the weather is not, whatever weather we have over toward the Delaware shows up in the Hudson Valley about 45 minutes later, half an hour later, sometimes an hour later. So I literally kept track. So the weather in the book is exactly the weather that was actually happening at the time. I mean, the quote unquote realism in the book is probably more closely developed than maybe maybe Trinity Fields. I was very careful about that too. But yeah, the weather is the same at the time. At a certain point, though, in my time as a writer, I got ahead of where the weather was back then, but I kept careful notes. So if it rains in the book, there's clouds over the Catskills, then that's what happened, you know. And I have it all in my notebook. It's keeping track of the weather, the temperature, what vegetables are in the vegetable garden, all that sort of stuff. It's all absolutely accurate.
Well, it's beautifully rendered. I feel like I spent an equivalent amount of time at that country house, you know, and visiting the Beekman and all these places,
right.
Some of which I'm familiar with. It was just such a wonderful immersion. And I will say this for anybody who's in lockdown or self-isolating or not able to get out much during our present circumstances, that this is a really nice way to get out and about and feel that you are in a different place. And in addition to just, you know, having this amazing experience of learning so much about the craft of not just forgery, but just of bookmaking and bookbinding. Now, how that's something else that, you know, the knowledge that you have of the different weights of paper and the stock that was used is that something, because I know you're a bibliophile and a collector yourself, is that something, knowledge that you've picked up along the way? Is it something at some point you ever, I know people can study it now, you know, but it was something you ever studied formally, or is it something that?
I studied bookbinding when I was in college. I had a fairly haphazard college career because I did a couple of years and I dropped out, went to Paris, moved back when I ran out of money, and then finished up rather quickly. But I worked at a bookshop only because I ran into debt at this bookshop, and the owner, a guy named Dick Schwartz, who I just adored, at one point he said, "Brad, you know how much you owe me for books?" I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty good." I did. He said, "I tell you what, you want to work for me? Like, here's a broom. Go upstairs and sweep and do some shelving and so forth." So I wound up working, and through him, I met a bookbinder who I persuaded to teach me how to bind books. And so I found myself doing rebacks of Roderick Random by Tobias Smollett and the second edition of Johnson's Dictionary, which is at the Cornell Library actually now. But so I learned a lot about it. I didn't stick with it. I wanted to move on to other things, but I've kind of done with a book almost anything you can think of. I've obviously edited them, written them, published them, bound them, collected them. I did two bibliographies actually when I was in my 20s. So yeah, I know books inside and out. I just love them. So that is no looking things up for me. You know, actually anything about books, I'm kind of on top of it already. And also the flora and fauna of the Hudson Valley. Other than keeping track of the weather, I didn't really have to do a heck of a lot of research on that kind of thing.
Yeah. Was there any point in writing either this or The Forger where, because I do this sometimes when I'm writing something that involves some, you know, skill or knowledge, that I will attempt to do it or enact it or reenact it in the course of writing the book. So sort of similarly to the way you're saying, you know, you were there in the real world in real time and you drew on that. Was there ever a point when you were working on this or The Forgers where you know, sat down and, you know, tried writing out Poe's signature or anything else to just see how it would work or not? I'm just curious. It just came to me when you were talking. I didn't realize that you knew so much about bookbinding.
Yeah, no, I never tried to forge Conan Doyle signature or Poe's. I studied all of his signatures, as many as I could find, and all that kind of stuff. But no, like I say, I've tried to forge W.H. Auden's signature when I was younger, but I just did it on a piece of paper and threw it out. So you can, don't worry about it. But no, I never tried to forge those signatures. But I tell you what, though, in terms of getting in a place and getting into what we went on a trip to, I went on a trip to Ireland some years ago, and people were asking, "Oh, you're gonna set anything in Ireland while you're there?" I was just working on the Forges at that time, and I said, "No, there's plenty of Irish writers going all the way back. You don't need any Irish material from Brad." So I said, "No, no, 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 no." But when I got back, then I thought, "Oh, that little town, the little town of what is it, Kenmare? Was it Kenmare?" In Ireland, that would be kind of a perfect place for Will and Meghan to go after Will got busted and things got a little out of hand in the United States. So they did wind up in Ireland. So, and now that it ended in Ireland, this book too. I think that's not nobody who hasn't read it will understand what happens until they read it. But no, really, place is important to me. But I don't need to force something. But I do know about paper. It was a very interesting problem to solve. It was like, where did he get the paper? Paper is so important. I mean, you can mix inks. There's ways you can age inks to get the crackling. You can deal with nibs, all that kind of stuff. But to get paper that's plausible, that's tough. Some people get it out of older books, the blank pages at the end of books that are, 17th century books or more. But yeah, it's I didn't try to forge anything.
Oh, no, I wasn't suggesting that. I was just curious, just to get the feeling of what it would be like to have the pen on the page. Because as I said, the tactile descriptions are really extraordinary. I felt like I could do it by the end of rereading.
That's good. I have to watch you, Liz. No, I can kind of feel it without having to do it. But I know a lot about paper. A very dear friend who was a long time ago at the Vandercrook Press, and I would watch her print. And I've known binders and all this kind of stuff. So I'm a true bibliomaniac.
Well, everybody in this novel, even the characters who are really genuinely shady and perhaps dangerous, everybody has this great love for books. I mean, they're all bibliophiles, if not outright bibliomaniacs, and which is one of the book's many charms, that here are all these people who know this world, and to them it's like it's the air that they breathe, and when they talk about things, they don't talk about it in a way that feels like an info dump. They're exchanging information, they're having a conversation, and all of this is brought in, and they're book lovers and they're book collectors, and they have Meghan runs a used bookstore, rare bookstore. And I know that you yourself obviously are a bibliophile and collector. Can you remember the first book that you acquired, that you bought when you were young? Was there a book that made you think like, all right, I'm at a point where I am going to become a collector? Oh, I think that there's an answer coming to this question. Audience members, this was not set up. That was a question that just came up.
Well, it's not very exciting. It's not an exciting book in terms of collectability, but the first hardcover book I bought was W.B. Yeats's collected poems, and you can see it's held together now with what is it? What kind of tape is that? It's like masking tape. Even noted, I bought this book in May 1972. It was my first hardcover book. But then I moved very quickly from toward the dark side. I was buying I got a scholarship to go to do comparative grad work at Yale doing comparative literature, and I wound up, they gave me the money up front, which is a huge mistake. And I wound up with, we were reading Tristram Shandy or Tom Jones. There was a dangerous place called C.A. Stonehill. It was my drug. I would go over and I'd buy like a second edition in the 6 volumes, 1749 of Tom Jones, or I'd buy literally the 9-volume Tristram Shandy.
Wow.
And then, I'd read it and so forth. And then when I ran out of the money, I could sell it for more money here in New York. I'd just take it down to New York. So I was just wanting to read it in the original. So that was, it quickly became, I don't know, obsession seems like a bit much. It doesn't keep me up nights.
Right.
But, I love when I see a book. There's a moment in The Forgers where Will asks his father, who's a consummate book collector, like, Dad, what constitutes a rare book? And the father says, when I haven't seen it before.
Yeah,
so
that's
you get to a point where you really know books so well that if something looks a little different, you can spot it. It's like a birder, you can tell confusing fall warblers. You can tell them apart if you just watch them long enough. You'll know that's a different one than you've ever seen before.
Well, we're almost at the moment to take questions from the audience, but I wanted to ask, so you've given us these 2 wonderful installments of this ongoing adventure, mystery that deepens with each passing book. We learn more about the characters, we learn more about the books and Forgery. And they are also, in addition to being, wonderful literary novels on their own, they're also great riffs on classic mystery crime writers. The first novel was Arthur Conan Doyle, and this is Poe. And you obviously hadn't exhausted yourself with the Forgers, because we have the Forger's daughter. Is there, do we have the Forger's granddaughter? Or, is there going to be, will Will and Meghan and his daughters,
the Forger's
will they continue?
I think I have to. I never wrote The Forgers to be the first volume of the trilogy. But after I finished, it was published, people kept saying, oh, wow, there's another book there. Why are you going to write another one, right? Because it's still left open at the end there. I was working at the time on a huge novel called The Prague Sonata. So I really paid attention to that. I got involved with that. When that was done, though, I thought, man, this Forgers, the title, my editor had suggested Forger's Daughter. I was thinking about it. And I reread The Forgers and annotated it very carefully. And saw there, I'd have to push things forward 20 years to make it work, but it was all there to do it. So I went ahead and wrote. So the next one that it occurs to me, it seems to me, that Agatha Christie is the obvious place to go next.
Really?
Yeah. Her 11 Missing Days intrigued me, and then you can bring Conan Doyle back in because Conan Doyle was involved in trying to find.
Yes, that's right. So I forgot
that. It all kind of comes together, and of course, Christie studied, Poe's 3 great tales of detection. The Purloined Letter, Murders in the Rue Morgue, and the Mystery of Marie Rogette. So I think it can all kind of come together nicely. I might do it next. In fact, I've been doing a lot of reading of Agatha Christie, who's so different from Conan Doyle or Poe.
Well, that sounds great.
Yeah, we'll see if it happens.
Sign me up. Well, we have some questions that from the audience. So let's see. There was mention made that forgery in a way is itself analogous to the act of writing fiction. So I'm curious, what is true within a forgery? Kind of a metaphysical, existential question.
What is true within a forgery? Well, if I understand the question, just speaking logically, the forgery is a true thing. The famous forger of paintings, whose name I can't think of at the moment, but he's really one of the great ones. He said that if he makes a painting, we'll say of a Matisse or something of it, that hangs on a wall in a museum long enough, it becomes a Matisse.
Mm.
And so I'm sure there are documents out there that we think are quote unquote real that may actually not be. So, a forgery takes on a life of its own. And I think in the same way that, you can forge a head and you can forge an image and all this kind of stuff. I mean, there's a truth to any of that. I don't know whether that's a satisfactory answer or not, but I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean,
Yeah.
What's real about even better than the real thing? I mean, what's real? What's realer than real? And what it does, actually, it casts shade on what's real. Rather than what is exactly real? Do we really know? That's another reason I wanted to write this as a dual narrated book, because she knows things he doesn't know, and vice versa. And the daughter, who has her own role to play, knows things that they both know, but doesn't know other things that they know.
Right.
And that's just very, to me, to get back to this word real again, that's very realistic. I mean, that's how life functions.
Here's a question that sort of dovetails in what you were mentioning about the possibility of doing something involving Agatha Christie. Somebody writes, the first book in the series had a focus on Arthur Conan Doyle. This one has a focus on Poe's Tamerlane. Did you consider any other authors? So obviously Agatha Christie. But why did you choose Poe and Doyle over them?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I love Sherlock Holmes. I mean, when you think of Doyle, but actually in the Forgers, there are other writers in there too. My friend Yates, he forges Yates. There's a wider expanse of writers who are forged in the Forgers. It's not simply Conan Doyle. Conan Doyle is like a major one, but he also is very good at Henry James, other writers as well. So there's some other forgeries in this book too, but this book is focused on forging a book rather than forging documents. So Forger's Daughter is about really forging a 13th copy of Tamerlane, basically. I don't want to get into it much deeper than that because I don't want to ruin the reading experience. But other writers do come up in the Forgers for sure.
Let's see. Somebody asks, is Mr. Morrow familiar with William Hallahan's novel about literary forgers, The Ross Forgery, which I've not heard of?
Yeah, The Ross Forgeries. I think I did actually check that out from the library and read around it. What I was mostly looking for was chemicals used to get the craquelure in the ink. I know about the Roth forgeries a bit, but I didn't base anything in here in the Forger's Daughter on the Roth. Don't I even mention something about that? Maybe not. Might have got taken out. But yeah, I remember. I can see the page in my head from that nonfiction book about how a certain kind of there was discoveries made by that forger that have been used by others, going forward.
Huh. By other forgers or by other? Oh, wow.
Well, and also by people who curators and so forth who want to uncover forgeries that might be in the library or offered to them or so forth. So you can be careful of it. But yeah, I read that mostly just for chemical tidbits.
Yeah. Another question. what is your most prized rare book?
Ooh,
Mm.
the one I don't quite have yet.
Yeah.
I have a few that I really like. I have a copy of Tristram Shandy. The ones I had when I was younger, I had to sell. But I have one in the original. It's called the original boards, uncut and untrimmed in the original wrappers. It's one of these books in the mid 18th century and into the 19th century and earlier. When they were published, they came often just in wrappers, like a paperback, with uncut edges. And then books were expensive then, and most people who bought them, they would give them to their own binder, and then they'd be bound in the handsome, leather bindings and things. So most books, it was very rare to find a copy of a book like that that's now renowned, that hasn't been bound up yet. So that's a pretty unique book. I like that. I have modern books, primarily a couple of copies of 1984 and the two different colored dust jackets, a red one and a green one when they came out, because there was, it was during the war, so there was shortages of ink and paper and everything. So, two copies of Animal Farm that were printed on the back of another dust jacket, Searchlight Books. So it gets kind of involved. I love Ford Maddox Ford's tetralogy, No More Parades, Parades End,
Yeah.
and I've been looking for years and years and years and years upon years for Some Do Not in a Dust Jacket, which is the first volume. It's impossible. I finally gave up because the Duckworth first edition, I think it's 1923. I think that you can't find it in the jacket, at least. But I found one of the American edition in a dust jacket. It came out the same year. So I recently managed to work it out that I could get that. But I have a lot of books that I love.
Well, this is a question for me, just jumping off that.
Yeah.
Is there a dream book? Is there a book that every time, I have a friend who's a collector and I can't recall the exact title now, so I won't say it, but there's a book that he has been looking for decades. And every time he steps into a used bookstore, that's the book he's looking for. And it was a novel by MFK Fisher that she wrote, I think it was by her, that she wrote pseudonymously. And the title is escaping me at the moment. But anyway, he is always looking for that book. And ever since he told me about it, I've always been looking for it. I'm not doing a very good job because I can't remember the title right now.
Right.
I haven't been out in a while. But anyway, so is there a book like that for you? Is there like one secret book that like you talk about the moment in The Forger's Daughter, which I just kind of got goosebumps when you talk, the character mentions the 13th Tamerlane, and you think, oh, is there a book like that for you? Is there a 13th Tamerlane or something else that you are always that would be your heart's desire?
Oh my gosh, there's just too many. I don't have just one. I'm sorry, I don't have just one. I'd love to have a copy of, but these books, unless somebody really made a mistake in pricing, these books would be way beyond what I could pay for them. I see books all the time that I adore. John Donne's poems, but I love the Kelmscott Chaucers. It's one of the most beautiful books ever made. There's a virtual book fair in London, which, if you like books, you can just go browse these fairs. And now that we can't go out to the regular fairs, there's quite a few you can attend around the world. So I was at the London Book Fair this morning, and there was a dealer there who had a Kelmscott Chaucer in the original pigskin. That's a great book.
Wow.
I love the 4-volume Canterbury Tales. I could just go on and on. There's too many books. It's not just one.
Yeah, I think for me I think it's the Kelmscott, the Mort d'Arthur, which is one of those beautiful, beautiful books that I've seen on display. But I know it's not likely to turn up in a local bookstore here in rural Maine, so I don't hold out hope for it.
Oh, you never know. You never know.
You never know.
Try out. I think one thing about visiting a bookstore is you have to train your eye to look for things that you're going there looking for something, but look at other things that you don't know about too. I mean, that's
yeah.
You need you'll make discoveries. If you just look for one thing you're going to look for and you're going to find it, then there's no joy of discovery in it. So,
And that's something that's changed in the world with the advent of the internet and ABE and, advanced book exchange and online used book dealers, is the dwindling, the demise of the used book trade. I mean, there are still used bookstores out there, but there are far, far fewer of them than there used to be. And that sense of potential discovery of, walking into a used bookstore and, any amount of books in London or, some of these other shops that are still or were before the pandemic still hanging on, that you could go in there and the search, the thrill of the chase, looking for something, which is, it's very convenient to go onto ABE and look for a used book, and it pops up for, $35,000, but it doesn't replace that thrill of anticipation and hope that just maybe it might be, in that box of books that's sitting there down in the basement that they haven't gone through and priced yet.
But it depends on, you can go pretty far afield though too. I bought two really, really, really cool John Fowles books that were inscribed to his editor, who was editor at Shadow and Windus, and they weren't much money. And also depending on who you want to collect. Like I'm a Angela Carter. What's the word for me? I'm obsessed with it. I love Angela Carter's work. So I have her first book, for instance, that's mimeographed when she was in college, called Unicorn. Huh. And she's Angela Carter from the get-go. But I also have childhood books of hers inscribed by her father to her when she was 6 years old, and then later books that she inscribed to her father. You just over time you can find these things. You can, Abe is, the thing to do is to try to be friendly with booksellers. Try to, it's harder to do now. We're all just inside, and it's just, but if you befriend a bookseller and you kind of let them know what you're after, not everybody goes. I've bought some wonderful books over the years right at the Strand. Actually, I've bought books in the rare book room that were cheaper to buy a first edition than to buy the original, buy it downstairs in the regular rooms. So, I mean, you never know where you're going to find books.
Yeah. And it's, we're almost out of time. And just to say, for all of you out there listening, watching now, support the bookstores, the indie bookstores as they open. Support the Strand if you're there in the city, and if not, online. Stores that sell new books, stores that sell old books. I mean, you're here because you love books and you love writers and reading, and we're here because we do too, and we're writers. So we are dependent on people going into stores or going somewhere and buying books to keep us going. And I even, when people buy, sometimes people ask me, oh, I bought a used copy of one of your books. I'm sorry, I didn't pay full price, so you didn't get a royalty on it. And, yeah, that's too bad. But I would much rather know that my books are out there in the world, still being found and discovered and read or reread, in no matter what condition they are in and no matter where they're found. So, the bookstores have taken a real hit, like so many other businesses during the pandemic. So do your best wherever you are to support them.
Yeah, and tonight in particular, the Strand is a case in point. The Strand, I was in the Strand yesterday, in fact, giving some signed book plates to go in the books, and it's such a magnificent, holy place. I mean, I just adore the Strand, and I know that to even put on an event like this cost them a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of trouble. And so to support the Strand is just a book, any bookstore like the Strand. Indie bookstores are really important, but also your local used bookshop. Otherwise, imagine if they start going away even more than they already have. It's just it's like a world with starting to miss a color or something. We all need books. And so I hope you do support the Strand, whether you buy my book or another book. We just need to support our local bookstores.
Yeah.
I want to particularly thank Nancy Bass Wyden, who has taken over the Strand from her wonderful father, who was just spectacular, a gentleman, Fred Bass. So she's doing a beautiful job, and the Strand is just in New York City. It's just one of the places. It's just a mecca. So if you're in New York, but they're online too. They offer books online. So that's our support your local bookstore.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, do support the Strand there. It's such a wonderful place. Every time I go to the city, I make a pilgrimage there just to, walk through and see everything upstairs, downstairs, check out the rare book room if I can. It's a wonderful place. And so anyway, let's make sure we keep it in all of our other bookstores, new and used, alive for when we all come back out again.
And how.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Brad and Liz. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. For whatever reason, my camera is not working, but my sound is. So we're going to make do. We almost had a perfect run. That's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. Thank you so much to Brad and Liz for having this discussion with us this evening. I am going to paste once more the Square link where you can buy a copy of The Forger's Daughter right now. Please go there now because we are about to close the room. But yes, I just posted it in the chat. So everyone in attendance, if you're interested, you can buy the book from us. But yes, do we have any last words before we adjourn?
I'd just like to thank everybody for attending, virtual as it is. And I really want to thank Liz, my buddy Liz Hand, for, I know you're a little jet lagged, Liz, so, but I really appreciate you doing this with me tonight. And great thanks to you, Nick, and everybody at the Strand, and to Nancy and all of you. So thanks so much. And thanks for everybody coming.
Yeah, yes. Same here. Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much, Brad, for asking me to be part of this, and everybody at the Strand and all of you out there in Zoom land. Thank you so much for being here, and get out there now, order Brad's book, order its predecessor, read it, and good night.
Yeah, good night.
All right. My camera came back on for my last hurrah. Good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Brad. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night, Liz.
Good night.
Bye.